we are all agree that Bitcoin is appreciating 30-40% per year. So you don't really need to do anything. Just hold it and it's fine. But in a way, especially in the West, we have this concept, and I think it will never go away. Put your money at work, right? Keeping idle those Bitcoin. I think all the shareholder of this Bitcoin treasury company down the road, the next cycle will say, okay, but what are you going to do with those Bitcoin? And honestly, I'm not seeing Michael Saylor bridging their Bitcoin in WBTC and some sketchy bridges somewhere. So in a way, like, you need to build Bitcoin native solution, because like it's the easiest way for this new Bitcoin treasury companies in a way to evaluate risk, because it will be Bitcoin native. They know the Bitcoin are there. They know there is a pre-signed path to get those Bitcoin back without, trusting that or that. Otherwise, they just go to financial entity, and that will be way better than go to a DeFi on other chain.
Welcome to the podcast. Today, Marco Argentieri, CEO and founder of Ark Labs, shares with us his entrepreneurial journey in Bitcoin. Marco is a longtime builder and product leader focused on expanding the utility and accessibility of the Bitcoin infrastructure. Ark Labs is using a very innovative approach to redefine scalability and programmability on top of Bitcoin. Hear from Marco on innovative solutions to Bitcoin's toughest challenges, the importance of building relationships for fundraising, and why Bitcoin's set to revolutionize financial services. Let's dive in. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only. If you enjoy our content, please remember to share or leave us a comment, as this all helps us greatly. Thank you. Lynn and I are partners at Base Layer Advisors, where we use our network of venture capital partners and startup founders to connect investors with unique opportunities within the Bitcoin innovation space. Alongside this, we help startup founders with their growth and fundraising. Visit our website's advisory section to learn more. Welcome to Build with Bitcoin. Today, we are joined with Marco Argentieri, who is CEO and founder of Ark Labs, a company and solution that is allowing Bitcoin to scale, and we'll get into hopefully a balanced conversation between the technicalities of what Ark Labs is and everything you're trying to solve for, Marco. I'm co-host Israel Munoz, joined with co-host Humberto, and let's get right into it. First of all, welcome and thanks for joining us on the Build with Bitcoin podcast, Marco.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So maybe we can start before we get into Ark Labs and the problem you're solving, Marco. Can we get an idea of who you are as an entrepreneur, a little bit about your background and how you were introduced to Bitcoin in the first place?
Yep, absolutely. I've been lucky to work on Bitcoin all entire my career. When I was 18 years old, I created my first startup in north of Italy. It was a Bitcoin for cash brokerage. So I was helping selling Bitcoin for cash. And at the time, 2014, so more than 10 years ago, it was very hard to get on an exchange or to find Bitcoin. At the same time, people also had so many questions, right? So Bitcoin never had a marketing department, never had, a way to explain what is it. And in a way also was, what everybody thought at the time being the decentralized PayPal, right? So the equivalent of BitTorrent, but for money. I put one of the first Bitcoin ATM in north of Italy, and the people, that was very interesting and first launch of the startup, because it really helped to draw a lot of attention from traditional media, right? So having an ATM, so you can withdraw cash, put cash, and get Bitcoin. So I think that was a very interesting entry point. And also that also was a very interesting phase for Bitcoin, because really everyone was using Bitcoin, not because they believing in the price going up or the financial aspect of Bitcoin, but everyone was really using it to put, for example, remittances, right? So many people were coming to me. They were saying, look, Western Union is charging me 20%, or they asked me a lot of, documents, or I cannot even get an account. And with you, I can really simply in 5 minutes send Bitcoin over from Italy to South America, right? And send part of my salary back home. So in a way, like Bitcoin was already solving many of those problems. But in a way, 2017, the fee spiked, and in a way, the scalability problem really hit the major everyone, and I would say people started stopping using Bitcoin as a money. And in a way, Bitcoin now, fast forward to, and right now, in 2024, we got ETF, and wow, now we are, went from a decentralized PayPal to actually digital gold, and is really part of every portfolio now of a major institutional investor now. So in a way, like looking back, I'm really looking to something that was like maybe even not even an industry, and now being something a really game changer.
Marco, just taking a step back further, one step back further, how did you come to be introduced to Bitcoin? I mean, do you remember and did you get it immediately, or what was your first impression of it?
Yep. So I remember like in high school, one of our professor mentioned it and to say, hey, there's a new thing. And again, the name Bitcoin was very appealing to me. And having a software engineering background, I was coding at the time. I said, oh, that sounds cool, right? So I cannot program, I cannot do things with normal money, but with this, I can look into the source code, I can go into details. So for me, it was really more a personal interest in the Bitcoin aspect, but also the fact that then was a global phenomena and something that really cool became something new where I said, okay, I really want to create a career around of it. Sounds fun, sounds interesting, cutting edge enough to focus on this.
And then the early use case that you had of Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and a substitute for cash and moving money around, is that how you really started thinking about scaling and the potential scaling problems of Bitcoin, and that's what you wanted to focus on? Or talk to us a little bit about when you realized that scaling was potentially a hindrance to the adoption and growth of Bitcoin.
Yep. At the time, Microsoft, Xbox, Steam was all accepting Bitcoin, right? And 2014, 15. But then, when fees start, getting very high, people really stopped using it. And in a way, they lost trust in Bitcoin as a, let's say, medium of exchange. And of course, the narrative as well from 2017, when we appreciated from 1,000 to 20,000, of course, people say, oh, wait a second. Even myself, I wasn't expecting that curve or in a way growth in terms of price. So in a way, like normally one side the price, on the other side the scalability really impacted many of those use cases. In 2020, I started with my company Vulcan Ventures, which is more like an R&D lab to do a lot of research, and we work a little bit at the beginning on Lightning Network, but wasn't the right place for us. We really needed the programmability aspect of let's say smart contract and stuff like that, and Lightning doesn't really offer that. That's why we started working on Liquid, and I'm still sitting on the technology board of the Liquid Federation, which is the sidechain from Blockstream, which basically is a clone of Bitcoin, but with more capability added. And in a way, like, yeah, I've been like spending a lot of time, not only scalability, the pure aspect or throughput of Bitcoin, but also like how we can expand the programmability, how we can expand the use cases that you're using Bitcoin for. Because yeah, buying Bitcoin, storing it in your wallet, that's amazing. That's for sure something game changer. But I think like the saving market is not big as the financial market, right? So it really completely different sides. And in a way, like it feels to me right now we are financializing Bitcoin, right? And that's why I think scalability is actually an enabler to actually increase those use cases. And if there is no scalability, you will go to Wall Street, right? To financialize Bitcoin. You're not using Bitcoin actually as the platform to financialize itself. And I think that's I think are very connected topics, scalability, but also like the amount of use cases and the expansion of programmability of Bitcoin itself.
Marco, to the best extent possible, can you help us try to categorize these scalability and programmability solutions? Because it can be a bit of a confusing topic. You have native programmability such as Miniscript. You have layer tools like Lightning, which you referred to, which is more so for the instant payments, instant settled micropayments. You have sidechains such as Liquid, and of course everything you're working on at Ark Labs. Before we get into what Ark Labs is exactly, how do you, just give us maybe your mindset or framework as far as how you think about this whole scalability and programmability side of things.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's a very, very good question in a way. I think I will categorize into major. I will divide it into category. One, I will call it native scaling. in a way, like you're really using Bitcoin natively and you're using the Bitcoin scripting to actually do something and ideally go off chain, right? Because again, you cannot scale a blockchain with another blockchain, right? So you need some other architecture to actually scale what actually doesn't work very well on the layer one. Or another approach is simply, hey, we just replicate another blockchain, right? And we call it layer two, but then there is a bridge, right? There is an automate. We just use the programmability to just like to allow you to bridge from the Bitcoin layer one into this, like, let's say, additional side chain or Bitcoin layer two on that side. So in a way, like you're creating a competing blockchain, just that you don't introduce a new token, you're just still using Bitcoin in a wrapped version. So I will categorize either you wrap and you move the wrapped version of that Bitcoin and that layer two sidechain roll up, call it what you want. And on the other side is like, well, how we can create an off-chain system. So we're not using the blockchain, but we're using somehow the blockchain just as a judge, just as a, let's say, in case things go wrong, we always go back to the layer one. But in the best possible scenario, if the incentive are right, we just stay off-chain natively, right? So we create a system. And I will say, I will put in this category Lightning Network. I think that has been, production since 2018, I guess, right? So, and that is live. It works right now. In the same way, I will potentially categorize state chain as an approach. So you're not actually introducing a new blockchain, but you're just like keeping this pre-signed transaction there. I will say what we're doing with Ark also is a native scalability solution or a native layer because we don't introduce another blockchain, but we just have a set of virtual transaction, right? We just create this virtual execution layer, very similar to, how cloud provider, in a way give you the assurance that you have a server, but you actually don't have a physical server on your name, right? So they handle the physicality of in the data center, but they just give you an abstraction that feels to be a server, right? It's called virtual machine. And I think what we are doing is like, with Ark is really that, right? So we try to have what we call virtual UTXO, and the UTXO is really when you home Bitcoin, you have an unspent transaction output, and we just try to give you a virtual version of it that try to have the same security guarantee as the layer one. I would say on the other category, you can put Liquid, you can put other sidechain, you can put rollups, BitVM rollups, because in a way, like, yes, even if they're trustless, the bridging in and out is trustless of those Bitcoin, you still have to grow your own blockchain, right? So it's a completely separated ecosystem. You're not touching much the Bitcoin layer as other solution.
Marco, and you mentioned fees, but can you just explain for our audience members who may not be aware, what are the constraints of Bitcoin scaling? Like why can't it handle the number of payments, and why are these solutions important to have?
100%. And many times we think as a bug, right? So we hear about it. Oh, Bitcoin doesn't scale, or the throughput is not enough for every person in the world. And in a way that this is seen as a bug, and that's why many other blockchain came out, right? Say, oh, we fixed this, now buy my token, right? Buy my other Bitcoin clone. But actually this is I think is a feature, right? Because we need to keep a global blockchain that is like decentralized enough. That's why it's low, and that's why it's also is capped in terms of throughput. So I would say the problem is block space and block time, right? These two constraints are what, for example, right now we have 10 minutes block time, which means to get some sort of Bitcoin finality of your transaction, you need to wait for a block, which is on average 10 minutes. And the other aspect is like we have a limited space in this block to fit with transaction. So you can put more than, let's say, 4 megabyte, but this number just to understand, like, is very limited, right? So 4 megabyte is like nothing, right? So a picture of my iPhone is really double than that on average. So in a way, it's very limited, but this is actually the feature of Bitcoin, and why I think Bitcoin will remain the highest blockchain, because it will always prioritize, to be safe, to not break, and to basically be always automated and long running without have humans to intervene, because like the slow time and also the limited space really prevent the DOS, right? So a denial of service by malicious actor, because in the end, Bitcoin is permissionless, as you actually need to have a system in place to prevent abuse of the system.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear you explain all of this, Marco, because I mean, admittedly, even I, for a long time, would get very confused with these different scaling solutions and, you know, sidechain wrapped versus native. And I think your framing really helps out. As far as Ark Labs itself, then, Marco, when did you found the company, and what has been your journey to date?
Yep, absolutely. I think in the early days, Ark has been announced, and many researchers in the space, tried to propose a solution that at the beginning was thinking to be the lightning killer, right? But at the same time, I did the first prototype with my team at Vulpen Ventures in December 2023 on Liquid, because at the time we thought that we needed a soft fork. We need a change to Bitcoin to make Ark work. But then in the spring of 2024, Ruben Samson, a researcher in the Bitcoin space, actually came out with a solution to, okay, you can actually practically do Ark on Bitcoin today with no changes to Bitcoin. And for me, that has been okay. I've been like really exploring Ark as a research in the last year, but the fact that you can actually build it on Bitcoin right now without asking permission, I think that really changed for me the priority. And we decided to spin off, and bring all the engineering team from Vulpen into Ark Labs. So in June 2024, we announced the company. And we were very lucky on the response, and we decided to focus basically for the next decade on what I see the biggest opportunity ever and the biggest asymmetric, occasion that I have to contribute back to what is Bitcoin. And in a way, like after a couple of months, we were also lucky to attract, a couple of very important team members, and also to have other partners to join us in the journey, like Team Draper and Fulgur and Axiom. So we closed a little pre-seed that helped us also to have a long-term vision to focus on a bigger picture.
Build with Bitcoin is a proud affiliate partner of River. River is a financial services company that allows you to purchase, sell, and transfer your Bitcoin all through a great suite of products, high security standards, and as of recent, even allowing you to earn a Bitcoin yield on your US dollar cash deposits. For a personalized onboarding experience, go to partner.river.com/buildwithbitcoin.
I have a question about that because, we talk a lot about the fundraising journey, and it's challenging often for Bitcoin companies to raise funding. You launched in June, and by August you raised your pre-seed fund at a healthy amount. It was $2.5 million, I believe. And you have Tim Draper, who's a Silicon Valley, he's one of the few Silicon Valley traditional VCs that's also, we know, is a Bitcoiner. But how did you, and then obviously Oleg, we're big fans of Fulgur Ventures, and you have some good names, but did you start your fundraising before you launched the company, or how did that journey kind of progress? And how did you approach these? What was your idea that you presented to them that got them so excited about supporting your journey with Ark Labs?
Yep, and you're very right in saying that to raise for a Bitcoin company is very hard. In general, to raise for a crypto company, at least maybe not in the last 2 years where the political landscape changed a bit, but like until 2 years ago or even last year was very hard, right? So if you put the name crypto, you think you're like, okay, you're gonna go to jail or you're doing something bad, like always been very challenging, right? In the mainstream investor, and especially Bitcoin, right? Because in a way, crypto has they are lucky in a way to have the possibility to, okay, we do a token, right? So we do a liquidity event, or at least investors know that in a couple of years they can potentially monetize, or, if the token get listed on secondary market, they can actually have a liquidity event, right? So I think that aspect is really put 2x difficulty on Bitcoin company, especially if you don't want to introduce a token and we just want to raise for equity. Because in the same way, like, Bitcoin is clear as has been an asymmetric bet Bitcoin itself, but so far we don't have an example of a pure Bitcoin company that in a way did a successful exit for mainstream investor. And I think even the broader crypto ecosystem, right? So just Stripe last year, right, or 6 months ago, when did the acquisition. Until that, there was no success story, right, for a crypto company to do a successful exit in 10 years. So I think right now is moving very well. The ecosystem, people are very interested. People are looking into it. But again, I think Bitcoin is still victim of the fact of like not thinking in a very ambitious way, or Bitcoin founder not thinking in an ambitious way to really say, okay, I understand what the rest of the ecosystem don't understand, that Bitcoin is the best rail, is the best ecosystem to build on. So I can sleep at night. I know there won't be a problem or regulatory issue. We know Bitcoin has total clarity everywhere and will always have because it's really decentralized, right? So in a way like that really make me sleep well at night, but at the same time, as a marketing problem, because I need to communicate this to the broader audience, and in a way also try to make the case of why this is the right strategy. When it comes, I think, to fundraise in general, I think, well, first of all, is an art, is not a science, right? So what works for us may not work for many others. But one thing I always suggest is like start building real connection, even before you have an idea. Like with Vulcan Venture, we've been self-funded for more than 4 or 5 years. We had conversation with many investors also to think about where the direction was of research, where to focus our team on. And many said, okay, are you guys raising? I said, no, we think we're not like an investable. We're not like a startup that can grow quickly, right? So we really R&D, we want to have the luxury to spend time in research, right? So like we did with Ark, right? Even before, with no pressure, right? To create a monopoly right away. But when you see that there is an opportunity to create a company that can really grow crazy, and I think can actually create a new market, and I think that's where I think to be, right, to create it's really a blue ocean, right? So if you are successful to create, a programmable layer on top of Bitcoin, well, we build the best place for fintech company, neobanks and digital banks to build on top of it, right? So when you have that conviction, then I think all the connection that you already have would be way easier, right? Because you don't need to go around and beg for introduction, because you've already been known, you've already been in the space, there are already people in the space vouching for you, right? Because in the end, it matters, right? What you've done, your reputation. So I think like the speed of fundraising is also the function of your own background and like the story that you can tell, and of course has to matter, and also the business case has to be appealing. But many times I see many other startups in the Bitcoin space, they have very good tech, potentially even a very good product, and also a potential to monetize, but they always been too much, not spending time to create those meaningful relationships that can actually help you, to help you in the fundraising process.
Did you kind of select who you wanted to be backers of your company? I mean, with all these relationships that you'd built, did you have a target list, and how involved are these investors with your kind of strategy and going forward? Do you rely on them, or are they strategic investors, or are they more financial investors? Would love to hear a little bit more about how you rely on your financial supporters.
100%. In a way, like I always consider investor, you're almost a co-founder, right? So you, and with a co-founder, always say, yeah, it's like a marriage, right? So you need to really go well in the long term. There will be a roller coaster, and then you need to support in good and bad moments. So in the same way, I think like taking money, of course, is important, but sometimes is like money only for the sake of having money is not great, right? You actually need investor that can help you to elevate what you're doing. Of course, the investor won't tell you your challenge, won't fix your problem, won't get you a functional product or a functional strategy. You have to do that. But once you, in a way, see all of this, and you have the alchemy, you have the right team, you have the right, product, and somewhat you see the product market fit coming, then when the elevation that, strategic investor can do, because in a couple of real nice introduction, they can really like change you from like being in total dark and actually being the momentum. So in a way, like, yes, I mean, we really wanted to look around and see who has been who could help us in our future, strategy. And I think like the fact that, Draper have always been investing in Bitcoin companies, not only in Bitcoin companies, right? So that has been very important for us. We didn't want to just have Bitcoin only investor. In a way, we really wanted to have a little bit of aspiration to go more mainstream. And I think Draper is like one of the best in that aspect. They really like very horizontal. They have connection across many industries. And most importantly, the Bitcoin company they invested are my favorite company. I think there are 3, 4 right now. I don't want to name, I don't want to mention to not make some mistakes, but they're all company, that actually work in the real world and actually bringing Bitcoin to be used in the real world. And I think I like to say that I really wish that to be a similar pledge, to try to be something very concrete and very useful for Bitcoin itself, but most importantly, the user of Bitcoin.
Yeah, you've done a fascinating job, Marco, with your fundraising and getting strategic partners on board. I mean, the Draper VC fund, as you mentioned, has been one of the most successful early stage technology investors in Silicon Valley. Folger and Axiom, both incredible thinkers. We've actually had both Alan and Oleg on the podcast before. So you've built a great team and backers as well. So hats off for that. And maybe we can transition now into how Ark Labs actually works, Marco. So maybe what are the different solutions? Because as I understand, there's this layer 2, more transacting solution. And then there's also a recently launched operating system called Arkade, which I believe is more on the programmability side of Bitcoin, right? So we'll be getting maybe a little more technical now, but what are the solutions that ArkLab provides?
So I think in a way we started with this journey to work and try to figure out the security property of Ark protocol, right? But at the same time, a protocol is not a company, right? So you actually need to build services or like actually monetize that. Otherwise you're not a company. You're just like a no-profit organization. So we right away understood that Ark, in a very simple way, is a compression technique. No more, no less. So in a way, like if we see, and maybe people already using Bitcoin exchanges, they're familiar with the concept of transaction batching, where you do a withdrawal from a Bitcoin exchange, you will basically have a Bitcoin transaction where like exchange to save on fees, they try to put multiple customer right in the single transaction. So in this way they can in a way batch again, compress a little bit their blockchain footprint. And Ark just take this approach and like elevate to the next level in a way where like actually we always consume a single so-called UTXO, so a single Bitcoin transaction output. And in that single transaction, we can potentially theoretically put tens of thousands of virtual transaction. And in the end, this is like very interesting property, because like compression really helps in many scenario when the Bitcoin fees goes higher, because it's very important to think about it that like fee are not calculated on the amount in Bitcoin, right? So you don't calculate, if I'm sending $1 million worth of Bitcoin, probably I will pay pennies, right? Or maybe if I'm sending $100, maybe I will pay $10. And that amount of the fee is based on what we call basically the mempool. The Bitcoin mempool is where actually we put the transaction to stay there for some time until they get included in the next block. So I think Ark is just this. So we spent a lot of time to say, okay, let's say we build this compression technology, but like what you do once you have this crazy compression, now you need to bring volume. Now you need to bring use cases, right? So, and in a way, like we look at it, and also maybe looking back and going on historical work and see where people were using Bitcoin in the early days. Well, Bitcoin in the early days was really used in a lot of programmable aspect. Every person was coming to me to do a purchase, especially the first time. They were coming with a special address called escrow, right? So you can actually build already on Bitcoin so-called smart contract that are basically an escrow to protect you, right, in this transaction, so you can refund, yalla, yalla, yalla. So in a way, we lost that because people are afraid, or not only people, but especially businesses and startups, to build on top of the Bitcoin layer 1 and build this kind of use cases. Because in a way, like if tomorrow the fees spike because there is an ordinal collection coming out tomorrow, and then there is a fee bidding war happening, and you need to shut down your business for a day. And that's really not good. Businesses will rather pay a flat fee or a subscription fee per month, but they don't want to have a surprise. They want a predictable fee system. So in a way, these are like, again, like I think what we are trying to work around is like the block space and block time constraint. And I think Ark is really trying to reduce two things. And in a way, like, okay, how we actually will bring this volume to actually enjoy and in a way, really leverage this compression that we're bringing to the table. And it turns out that in the end, sure, payments is interesting. Many use cases are around Bitcoin payments, but we can say that 99% of the payments in the crypto space are stablecoin, right? So I think on that angle, there is the stablecoin aspect where like of course, we are trying to work as well to introduce, asset support. But again, like if you're using Tron, if you're using Polygon, why you care, right? So you use the rail that is it. And in a way, stablecoin use cases are very mercenary, right? They don't really need your chain. They don't need to be on Bitcoin in a way. So even though we will support, still payments is not something very captive. It's not something where we think we can build something good for Bitcoin itself. And that's why we think we introduced Arkade. And Arkade is our flavor, our way to commercialize an Ark protocol, and would also be the name of our layer 2, so-called, right? So basically people will be able to have a full-fledged ecosystem to send transactions, to send Bitcoin, send stablecoin, but most importantly, do all the very basic primitive that we do expect from, from a blockchain in a way, right? So people get to know about Ethereum, they know about all these crazy financial use cases, but then when you look at Bitcoin, you cannot actually do anything of that. The only way to do those things with custodians or exchange and et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, we're really focusing on those. I'm very interested about Bitcoin lending. I think that's the most obvious use case that you want to do when you have your Bitcoin. And right now you have many places in, let's say, in other blockchain to use so-called DeFi, but you need to bridge your Bitcoin, which means you are introducing counterparty risk with even worse, maybe sometime a custodian, like who's running the federation, who's running that wrap, that bridge. And notoriously, bridge has been very insecure, right? In Ethereum, we've been hearing every 6 months about that other hack about the bridge. So, and also bridge, from a first principle perspective, a bridge is like a pot where all the money are concentrated. And if there is one risk, you have a systemic systemic risk for all the money of everyone, where instead with what we are building I think with the approach with Arkade, we actually try to have you a pre-signed transaction that actually can go on real Bitcoin if, in a way, the system doesn't work. But in the best scenario, you're always transacting off chain. You're never touching the blockchain, but you're never bridging in a single pot where all the money goes, in a way.
So can you talk about use cases, like what does Arkade allow developers to build around Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystem that wasn't possible before? And Marco, also just in your vision for it, are these all tied to financial scaling of Bitcoin, or are there other use cases? I know a lot of the other projects around Bitcoin, and especially the ones that aren't truly tied to Bitcoin, are, and obviously we're talking in October of 2025. So there's a lot of discussion about non-financial transactions and on Bitcoin, and then financial transactions. So can you talk a little bit about what Arkade does and what your vision for it is?
Yep, absolutely. So I think you can really, the interesting aspect in Arkade is like we're trying to introduce more programmable aspect that Bitcoin itself doesn't work. We still retain this virtual transaction semantic, which means instant execution, which means we remove all the limits that Bitcoin layer 1 has in terms of composing one transaction with another transaction that like unlock another maybe contract. But beside the technical aspect, I think what we really think would be really interesting is like in a way creating the platform for fintech, neobank, and digital banks to actually create new type of use cases that actually use Bitcoin as a backend right? And not only just, we're still using the classic fintech, right? The classic financial system, but you're actually basing new products on top of Bitcoin, which is really like an asymmetric, way to deliver to your customer, because there is no central bank, right? So there is literally like Bitcoin itself is a programmatic issuance, right? So Bitcoin itself is a central bank, right? Which has a programmatic issuance of new coins. And why we stop there? Why we're not creating also the commercial bank, and why we're not creating also the fintech in a programmatic way? So they can offer services, financial services, but at the same time, they don't want to hold the funds of their user. And I think that's a very maybe nuanced, but at the same time, very important. Like most of the fintech don't want to freeze your account. They have to, because the system is like, well, we're getting like an account from I have a license from this regulatory body, and I need to, follow. Many times financial institutions, they want to offer financial services to you. The moment they cannot do it anymore for many reasons. I'm traveling, I'm a digital nomad, my proof of address is not good anymore. And I mean, of course they say, okay, I cannot give you a loan now, right? Because you don't have your, let's say KYC or process being in the right space. But at the same time, they don't want to freeze your money. You know what I mean? So in a way, like if you can create a bank of the bank of the future, I'm seeing, and I hope to create, this financial primitive, this financial software for this new type of banks, they actually want to keep your custody. So you keep your Bitcoin or you keep your asset, right? But at the same time, maybe I will just stop giving you a new loan or giving you a new margin account on your behalf. But I don't want to freeze your money. That's not my job, right? My job is not to be a custodian. It's not to be your vault. This is your money. Whenever you want to do a financial transaction, we'll follow all the rules and we do our financial, application on top of it. So I think this is a very important aspect, which I'm very bullish. And I think also the fact, and this goes to, for example, Revolut in Europe, which is like the biggest fintech ever here. In a way, even Revolut was all the banking licenses. Right now, they're talking about a stablecoin play. And that, really wonder, like, okay, they have everything. They can do really everything. They have a full bank license in Europe. Why they're exploring stablecoin? So this tells to me that if you want to go global, if you actually want to innovate faster, you need to actually not only innovate on the front end level, which I think fintech are being very good, but you also need to replace the back end, in a way. And the only way for me is Bitcoin.
That's so fascinating, Marco. We were speaking just before recording. I was telling you that I spent a little time at Swift, right before doing the podcast here with Lynn, and what you just mentioned was something I'd been thinking about for years already. Of course, having Bitcoin on the background, it gives you a clear picture of this, but all the so-called innovation, and I don't mean to discredit, fintech innovation in any way, but what you mentioned is just fundamentally so important, because a lot of the past decade of innovation in fintech has been precisely that, the front end, right? It's just how we interact with ultimately the same rails. And yeah, those rails have even gotten a little more efficient, but you're still in a web of intermediaries that's connected to the, fiat central controller, right? So it's just fundamentally a completely different system. And what you just described with Arkade as an operating system for this programmability, I mean, that's really the true vision of this decentralized finance concept that was talked about in the early days of Bitcoin. And then, we got all these other blockchains, but then you get away from the decentralized Bitcoin network.
Yes.
So I think we many people have gotten kind of lost in that zigzag path. And what you just described as far as your vision for Arkade is, I mean, it's fascinating, because that's truly the decentralized finance platform that, and you have lots of money in the public markets right now also chasing that concept, let's say, with these other blockchains. Anyways, not to get too off topic there, but I mean, related, I do want to ask you your thoughts on, how are incentives aligned as Ark Labs, the company that's creating these products? Because and some could argue, okay, so you are a company, and you of course seek, some healthy margins or profits, which we can get into shortly. But what's the centralization risk there, or how have you mitigated for that within the Ark ecosystem?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and I will also try to go back to the analogy of, I think, cloud providers, because in a way, like, even the early days of internet, we thought about it. Everyone will run their own server, they will run their own mail, protocol at home. That's how internet is supposed to work. But it happened that in a way we couldn't, right? But even just think about companies, early e-commerce company, they had to buy their own server, they had to screw, they had to have their own data center, right? So it was a very high barrier of entry, right? Because you actually have to build physical infrastructure before you can focus on your own web application. And I think what Amazon did, in a way, popularizing virtual machine, is literally said, hey, I will give you something that for you fills. You have your own server, you can log in, you can install your program, you can install your application, but at the same time, you don't need to handle, right, all the complication of the physical server. Like, we run maybe 2-3 beefy big server, right, in a single location. We are the expert, we focus on that. We just give you an abstraction, a virtual machine that you can use it, and when you're not using anymore, you just shut down and you just pay for on demand. So in a way, like, unless we think that everyone will be able to run their own server, I think we need to follow the same path. We need to keep guaranteeing you have your own server, you can connect, install your thing, right? And not depend on a single big giant corporation that actually offer you e-commerce services. So give the possibility to big startup to build their own e-commerce. And that's how I'm seeing it. So that's why we're focusing on like giving you a virtual transaction layer, right? So you want to keep the security of Bitcoin. In this case, of course, the analogy is like, I want you to keep, in a way, a credible exit path of real Bitcoin with no way for you to you don't need to ask permission to a federation or to a third party to get your Bitcoin back. Otherwise, you're just a very a custodian, right? So you're not really a layer. So I think that's important. That's what we want to preserve, right? We want to preserve the security of Bitcoin, or at least as much as possible close to the Bitcoin censorship resistant property. But at the same time, since we want to expand the usage of Bitcoin, we actually need to understand that we need to make easy and very simple to build on top of it. So I would say the Ark protocol and Arkade is sure a client-server protocol in the same way Amazon Web Services is a client-server, not protocol, but it's a client-server company, right? So they focus on like things where actually economy of scale are necessary, expertise are necessary, but at the same time they offer you a nice abstraction, a nice API to actually only focus on your own business, building a web application. That's what I'm thinking. If you want to expand, if you want to go from here to the next billion, right, of user of Bitcoin, we actually need to take into account that we cannot assume everyone will actually run the entire stack. So what is the best solution? My approach is like, it's not like giving up, it's just like being pragmatic and say, okay, what is the best I can do? First, without taking custody of the funds. Otherwise, like, we're like just, back to square one problem, right? So I don't want to take custody. Okay, now eventually, yes, there is a force in architecture to be more like client server, but that also means being efficient and actually solving problem and actually onboarding companies so they can build on top of their businesses. And those companies are the best to make Bitcoin more than just a static asset, but actually be programmable money. You need company, you need them to innovate, you need them to create their own use cases. We cannot come up with everything. So I think these are more like, okay, let's take a pragmatic stance, but at the same time, try to be as much as possible, not, in custody of funds, and try to give as much as possible the property of Bitcoin. That being said, of course, our team is full of like, first day Bitcoiner. We always wish to try to decentralize as much as possible. So if I can make another analogy to a cloud provider, what if the console, right? So the control plane of Amazon can actually be decentralized. So anyone can actually acquire a stake maybe, or put something there, and maybe the same way, maybe you're buying the shares of Amazon, but you're not controlling the Amazon Web Services control plane. But what if we can replicate that aspect? And of course, like, we're trying to research in that direction, and we think that whenever we will reach very good scale, I think that will be something that will pay off the research we are trying to do to also try to decentralize and to remove ourselves, to not be captive, right? But actually trying to always building the next innovation on top of it, right? Because in the end, there is no moat, right? Or if we think that we create a moat just by the fact we are the first and we are there, I mean, that will just be parasitic and will take zero time to a big incumbent to just copy our code and just do that. So how I'm seeing is like, I will try to decentralize as much as possible for how efficient can be, but at the same time is the rate of innovation that is important for our aspect to actually always be the first to understand very well the system in a way, always try to propose maybe flagship product on top of this infrastructure we are building.
This reimagination of financial services on Bitcoin is fascinating. It also brings to mind, I mean, when you talk about fintechs, and I've worked with a lot of fintechs over the years, but regulatory issues are always important, or considerations, because you're talking about non-custodial and you're talking about kind of one layer up from Bitcoin. Does that bring up any, I mean, and that sounds to me like it's more private. So as people may or may not be aware that everything that's registered on the Bitcoin blockchain on the layer one is traceable. I mean, you know which address it is. So it's actually one of the most secure ways of being able to follow transactions. But you as a company, if you're on this layer above Bitcoin and you're compressing the amount of transactions where you have millions of transactions, would you fall under any regulatory scrutiny for tracking those transactions, or how do you think about, how does Ark Labs think about privacy and regulatory balance?
Yep. We, of course, as a first-time Bitcoiner as a team, we care a lot about the privacy as being like a fundamental right for every human being. So for us, it's very important. And I will say of course, it's a very huge topic, right? So I think I will discourage people to give a slogan about it because it's very hard. In the same way, I think the peculiarity of the blockchain is like everything is recorded forever. And in a way, your bank account is more private than Bitcoin. Because like maybe your bank account is your banker, maybe the government knows about it, but like think about maybe just a very basic aspect, like, as a trader, if I'm doing, any operation on a public blockchain, everybody, especially my competitor, will see my trade, right? And I think that's really very bad in a way. And normal banks, normal, fiat money, digital money in a fiat account, right? They're actually more private, more confidential, or at least, right? So at least, you are off this public ledger of transactions. So I think that's an aspect where like I would say any layer two, but especially the Bitcoin native layer two, like Lightning and what we're doing at Arkade, they remove that blockchain footprint, right? So you remove that public trail, on the permanent blockchain, in a way. And this is just like making very standard, normal to how the financial world work, right? So we're not like doing something more anonymous. We're just like doing how it should be, right? Trying to move all the coffee purchases, all the small, loans, micro loans took by millions of people off of a public ledger, which in the end is very costly, is very expensive, right? So I think that's the first aspect. So we really try to improve the current situation and try to move to a system where at least who is your like intermediary or who actually are access of your data, but not the entire public. And especially not in the future when maybe right now is okay, but in the future maybe you don't want to disclose something. So I think like forward privacy is also very important. Of course, as you can imagine, as a company, and I think we've been maybe even even before started writing one line of code, I would say we've been very mindful to trying to understand how the legal framework is around what we are doing. I think the peculiarity of the aspect, I think, of course, is changing, right? So the regulatory oversight happening in the last 2 years, especially in US, totally changed. It flipped 180. So in a way, if you ask me this question 2 years ago, I was like, okay, very, I would say, hard to answer. I think right now there is more optimism in a way where regulators are like, in a way, like trying to not to fight what is in the end inevitable, right? To happen. We need to innovate. And if you innovate on the financial aspect, you also need to innovate on the regulatory aspect. I would say that, our approach here is like trying to use cutting edge technology that try in a way to remove as much as possible liability to us in terms of like visibility on the transaction. One thing which, in Arkade also introduce we are introducing is the usage of secure enclaves or trust execution environment. 2 years ago, we're very early. Right now, we think, based on our research, to be a very important aspect, so we can actually operate cloud computing services in a way where we can prove we cannot see data. We cannot actually see into it. And this is very important. Sector like AI right now, they're looking about confidential compute or so-called confidential inference for many reasons. Like imagine if you are you're an hospital, or maybe you're a defense or a government agency, you don't want to throw all your data, to ChatGPT, right? So to a California-based company, right? So for obvious reason, like it's impossible to have all the intelligence be an API of a private company. So I think that aspect, we are just like trying to piggyback basically on like what is the cutting edge in terms of like being confidential regardless of financial transaction, right? So we actually need to start from the assumption that we don't want to be in the middle as much as possible. So we're trying to leverage on the side trust execution environment for this, and also to improve our trust assumption as operator, to offer maybe a better user experience, to wallet a better services, to build it on top of us. So we're trying to take all the step. Again, there is no one solution, and of course we're trying to work with the regulator as much as we can to create pain. But I will say in the same way, rollups like Coinbase has its own rollup, right, called Base. I think we're very, very similar in that aspect as a regulatory frame, as we working towards. So we think actually we have way more example. We are not just like one of a kind, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. Right now there is so much example across the industry that we can actually leverage for our own benefit.
Fascinating, Marco. And I mean, if you do this right, the amount of economic activity that you're going to unlock through this programmability is I mean, it's a bit mind-blowing. And to the extent that you can share, Marco, who are the type of, maybe beta users that I would imagine for this operating system, you're maybe looking at Bitcoin native, custody solutions, lending solutions, maybe derivatives products, exchanges. I mean, give us an idea of who these, early interested clients or potential Bitcoin native solutions are that you're speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, as a vision, I really think that what we are trying to create, if we are successful, will be a blue ocean. So we are going to create new type of company, new type of business model that don't exist right now, right? So a company that they don't exist without us, and that will be the best case scenario. But it will take time. It will take a lot of work to reach there. So at the same time, we want to be pragmatic and see where right now we can be helpful to current business or current business model. And I always try to mention that actually Arkade is not a competitor to Lightning Network. We actually improve Lightning Network in the same way Lightning Network can help Arkade, because like when launching right now with Arkade live, we can deposit right now to Coinbase or to Binance thanks to Lightning. Right. So, and I don't need to go them convince and hey, exchange support now Arkade, but like Lightning is this like kind of lingua franca, right? So this like connective tissue that actually custodian and let's say layers like us can use right away without asking permission to connect to other layer, to other exchange, to other ecosystem. And I think the biggest startup which I'm very excited to partner with and to work with is Boltz. Boltz is this like non-custodial exchange. So it allows you to go from Bitcoin on layer 1 to Lightning, or Lightning to Liquid, or Lightning to Roadstock, right? So in a way, they're trying to take all the OG Bitcoin layer 2s and trying to become a sort of bridge between them, just because you're using the instant settlement of Lightning to go over. And they are literally a business that is built on Bitcoin. They wouldn't exist if Bitcoin wasn't around. And the interesting aspect, like they need also scaling, because like if they need to grow and they need to get like thousands of swaps, right, in the next second, the Bitcoin blockchain wasn't able to support. And indeed, in May 2023, they had to shut down for one entire day. I always tell this story because it's very, people don't believe it, but for one day they had to shut down because there was an ordinal collection coming out and the fees spike, right? Maybe the day before was like 10 cents, but then that day, $200 to get in the next block, and they had to say, guys, we are shutting down our swapper service. We cannot operate. And that's why I think for them, building on top of Arkade will basically be a way to have a predictable fee model and will actually be able to scale much more other chain or much more other layer, because then they have a way, they have a buffer, so they don't always need the Bitcoin blockchain when they need Bitcoin settlement, in a way. So I think we are trying to focus on this very Bitcoin native company. Another is Lendasat, which, just announced their open beta. They offer Bitcoin loans, so you can lock Bitcoin in an escrow, and then you can get stablecoin or even fiat or even a prepaid virtual card on top of that. So in a way, they're trying to create a financial company without being a classic, custodial financial company. And even for them, it's like, well, if you need process thousands of loan, and a very small commercial bank in America every day is doing thousands of loan, they won't scale on Bitcoin. So they really need ourselves right now without having the full-fledged, in a way, ecosystem being built out. So we're really focusing on like this Bitcoin startups who understand very well the problem already, and in a way we are giving them tangible value right away from the get-go. And I think that's how we're thinking. So we're trying to go with small player, which move fast. They're also technologists, so they're not scared. They don't need like crazy stamp of approval for us. As you can imagine, being ourselves a startup, we need to conquer the market and credibility and the trust of the general market. So in a way, we need to build and grow together with all this startup and help each other. But I'm pretty sure that down the road, in the same way right now, Stripe is looking a lot to Ethereum world, because all the ecosystem has been built in the last 4 years, right? So I think DeFi is a good word, right? Decentralized finance is really a great word. It's just that we are associating too many scams or too many things that happened in the past. But actually, I think Stripe right now is building on EVM or Ethereum rails, because there has been doing a lot of test bed with maybe stupid use cases that right now we will regret about it, but in a way they've been a test bed for their infrastructure. So that's how we're seeing, and that's why I'm focusing on Bitcoin native use cases that actually cannot exist outside of Bitcoin, right? So if you want to do Bitcoin loans, you want to use Bitcoin as a collateral, and you don't want to go wrap Bitcoin in some federated or sketchy bridge, right? You want to be on Bitcoin as much as possible. And I think that's where like we try to focus. And at the same time, if you're able to create some new kind of structured financial products, we're seeing the emergence in this cycle of Bitcoin treasury company, right? We are all agreed that Bitcoin is appreciating 30-40% per year, so you don't really need to do anything. Just hold it and it's fine. But in a way, especially in the West, we have this concept, and I think it will never go away: put your money at work, right? And keeping idle those Bitcoin. I think all the shareholder of this Bitcoin treasury company down the road, the next cycle, will say, okay, but what are you going to do with those Bitcoin? And honestly, I'm not seeing Michael Saylor bridging their Bitcoin in WBTC in some sketchy bridges, somewhere. So in a way, like, you need to build Bitcoin native solution, because like it's the easiest way for this new Bitcoin treasury companies in a way to evaluate risk, because it will be Bitcoin native. They know the Bitcoin are there. They know there is a pre-signed path to get those Bitcoin back without, trusting that or that. Otherwise, they just go to financial entity, and that will be way better than go to DeFi on other chain.
Marco, I mean, maybe you can expand on that and just talk a little bit about how you're thinking about adoption challenges, how you get more people familiar with what Ark Labs is doing. I mean, for me personally, I remember when Ark was launched, or when it was announced, when the whole concept was, and at the time it came out, it was believed that it would take several years for it to really be functional, and that there were changes required on Bitcoin in order for the functionality to really take place. And then you launched Ark Labs and proved that it's functional now. And I think that there is some confusion that maybe people have been working with Lightning and they think that Ark is a competitor to Lightning. And so how are you approaching the growth of your company and just getting the message out that Ark is a flexible system that works with Lightning, with Liquid, with other players, that and that it's an important technology base. So how do you think about that?
Yep, and this is literally my challenge, I would say, as I'm leading my team towards, how to actually go to market. I think technology is important, but I will say it it plays a minor role when actually you are like need to battle with perception, you need to battle with go to market, you need to battle with, way more better funded company that in a way they're proposing the same solution, maybe worse on a technical level, but like in the end, the message is what matters, right? How you can go to market, how, your strategy is, that's very important. So I think I'm spending enough time in my more than 12 hours per day working to think about and try to evaluate and validate an approach on how we can actually create our own value proposition. And I think in a way, yes, you're very right, and we're trying in our communication to make clear that what we are doing is very well compatible with Lightning, and actually very helping Lightning in many aspects. And I think that's how we win, right? So to be complementary and to try to give value where actually we really give value, right? So Lightning, in a way, like people are in a phase where like we thought Lightning was like this Visa and MasterCard, right? But actually it's more like Swift, right? And people got delusion, they're deluded right now about this. And we understood this. Maybe we could have launched something more scrappy 6 months ago. But the same way, what we realize is like nobody want to play with half-baked or like just, be in a garage and try with a server like it was for Lightning, because there was a lot of hope in 2018. Everybody was like with a super solution, we're like spending a lot of time because there were a lot of enthusiasts. And right now we're like on this like, okay, nothing works. I just keep my Bitcoin cold storage. I don't think Bitcoin will ever be able to scale or to do anything more than that. Ciao, I'm out of it. So in a way, like we decided to, okay, we don't only build the solution and then wait for people to come, but actually what we need to do is create a full-fledged ecosystem. So when we launch, people actually, they see, familiar brands or familiar names or startups that already been solving problem in the Bitcoin space. And right now they can actually improve those problems even better thanks to us, right? So we've been like trying to partner, and I mentioned again, I think this is a crazy team, amazing team. Bolts is one of the best team, and I think that's why we really wanted to launch Arkade with a full-fledged ecosystem to not feel like a cathedral in the desert in a way, right? So yes, it's amazing, but like, okay, what they gonna come to do here, and in a way. So I think, of course, I don't think it's a solved issue, but I think that's our strategy, and so far we are getting a lot of good, positive feedback, and I'm pretty sure that from here and onwards will always be more and way more application and way more companies realizing that we're bringing value, and will also reinforce by themselves. And also I hope to make this company even more ambitious and say, okay, now finally we have the gunpowder to actually take back or reshore those use cases that maybe went to other blockchain right now.
Yeah, and you guys are very well positioned, I think, Marco, because timing wise, maybe the technology's been there for a while, or maybe you guys could have built what you built, maybe even, I'll say 3, 4, 5 years ago. But it's only now, I think, that not only is the awareness of Bitcoin as an asset and technology starting to actually take off, but on the regulatory side as well, we are starting to see, kind of clear rules of the road, to put it that way. And I think you're at a very good moment where entrepreneurs are going to see opportunity and be comfortable with trying to build new businesses right natively on Bitcoin in this case. So I mean, I think extremely exciting moment in time, and especially for everything that Ark is working on. So we're really happy that you could join us to get into all of this, Marco. I mean, really, it's kind of what Lynn and I set off to do with Build with Bitcoin. It was, we said we need to show people that Bitcoin as a protocol, that you can innovate on top of it, right? Like we need to start to showcase all of these different, value unlocks that this new protocol provides. And, I'm sure you feel the same way, Lynn. This has been an extremely exciting conversation.
Could have gone on a lot longer too. So, just Marco, as we're closing out, for people for developers, for entrepreneurs, for anyone who's thinking about this, what are some resources that you could point them to that would be easy? And we'll include these in the show notes too. But how can people learn more about what Ark Labs is making available?
Absolutely. So I think Arkade with the K, os.com, I think is the best website. You will find there a documentation portal, which we update on a weekly basis. We do have also a Twitter account, which we try to keep it active and try to share our journey. And we go by Arkade OS as well as handle on Twitter. And I think, yes, also we have a Telegram group you will find in our website. If you want to get in the nitty-gritty details with our team and explaining more technical aspect, I think we're always happy to have a conversation. And if you have any ideas or even a crazy one that you think is impossible, come talk with us, because probably we can make it happen.
Crazy ideas.
And again, thanks for joining us today, and really look forward to following the progress as well.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
We'll look forward to having you back, because this is a journey we definitely want to follow. Thanks, Marco.
Thank you.